The kingdom of Valoran had not seen its king in 4 months, and the castle had learned to breathe without him. Servants moved slower. Guards laughed louder in the barracks at night. The great hall, usually stiff with formality, had grown soft around the edges, the way a house does when the strict parent goes away for a long trip. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone felt it. King Roran Ashwood ruled with a firm hand, and firm hands make people careful. Careful people relax the moment the hand is gone. Nobody expected him back for 3 more weeks. That was the plan. The border war with the northern clans had dragged on longer than anyone liked, but the last reports said the king's army was still 2 ridges away from home, still counting supplies, still burying the dead from the last skirmish. Messengers rode out every few days with updates. The last one had said the same thing the ones before it said, "Hold the castle, keep the peace, wait." Then a horse came back without its rider. It stumbled into the castle stables in the middle of the night, lathered in sweat, one strap of its saddle torn loose, blood on its flank that wasn't the horse's own. The stable master didn't wait for morning. He sent word straight to the castle steward, and the steward didn't sleep again that night. By the time the sun rose, everyone assumed the worst. A messenger dead on the road, an ambush maybe. The northern clans were not known for mercy toward stragglers. Nobody knew that the king himself was already less than a day's ride away, riding hard with a small guard, because he'd had the same fear the moment he heard about scouts going missing near the eastern pass. He hadn't waited for permission from his own advisors. He hadn't waited for the safe, sensible plan. He'd simply turned his army over to his second-in-command and ridden for home with 6 men and a feeling in his gut that something was wrong. Kings are not supposed to have gut feelings. They are supposed to have strategies. But Roran Ashwood had learned a long time ago that the feeling in his stomach had saved his life more than once, and he was not about to argue with it now. He reached the outer gates a little before dawn. He did not send a rider ahead to announce him. He didn't blow the horn that would have woken the whole castle and lit every torch on the wall. He simply rode up to the smaller side gate, the one the guards used for quiet errands, and told the 2 men on duty who he was. They nearly fell over themselves saluting. He waved it off, told them to keep it quiet until he'd had a look around, and walked his horse through the gate himself. There is something strange about coming home to a place that doesn't know you're there. The halls of Valoran Castle were the same halls Roran had walked since he was a boy, the same cold stone, the same worn grooves in the floor where centuries of boots had passed, but walking them unannounced, in the dark, with dust still on his coat and 3 weeks less sleep than a man should have, made the whole place feel like somebody else's house. He heard his own boots on the stone and thought, absurdly, that he sounded like an intruder. The castle at that hour should have been dead quiet, the kind of quiet that comes with everyone asleep and nothing moving but the wind in the towers. Instead, it was quiet in a different way, a held-breath way, the kind of silence a house makes when it's hiding something. Roran had spent enough years on battlefields to know the difference between empty and occupied. This felt occupied. He should have called for the guard captain. He should have lit a lamp, walked straight to his own chambers, and slept like a reasonable man who'd just ridden 200 miles in 3 days. Instead, some old instinct, the same one that had gotten him home early in the first place, pulled him down the east corridor, toward a part of the castle he hadn't set foot in for 10 years. The old nursery. He hadn't thought about that room in a long time, not on purpose. It was the kind of place a person's mind slides past quickly, the way you avoid looking directly at an old scar. His sister had died in that room. Her child had died with her, or so everyone had been told, and afterward the door had been shut and the key given to the head steward with strict instructions that it stay shut. Nobody used that wing. Nobody wanted to, which was exactly why the thin line of candlelight leaking out from under that door stopped him cold. He stood there a moment, just looking at it. A sealed room, a room that had been locked for a decade, light spilling out from underneath like it belonged there. Then he heard the voice. It was low, careful, pitched the way you pitch your voice when you're trying to be gentle and urgent at the same time. "Stay silent, please, just a little longer." He knew that voice. It took him a second to place it, because he'd only ever heard it directed at floors and hallways and empty rooms, murmured apologies for being in his way, quick, "Yes, your majesties," that never quite met his eyes. Ren, the quiet maid who had scrubbed these halls for 2 years without once looking at him directly, the way most of the lower staff learned to do around a king with a reputation for being hard to read. Except this wasn't the voice she used with him. This voice had warmth in it, steadiness. It was the voice of someone talking to something small and precious, something that needed calming down, not impressing. He stopped walking. He did not open the door. Not yet. A king who has fought wars learns patience the hard way, the kind of patience that comes from watching impulsive men die because they charged before they understood what they were charging into. So instead of throwing the door open, Roran stood in the shadow of the corridor and listened, and through the crack in the door, he watched. The nursery had not been touched in 10 years, or so he'd believed. The furniture that had lasted was warped a little with age. The tapestries on the wall had faded to the color of old paper, but someone had cleared a corner of the room, swept the dust away, and set a small cradle there, a cradle that had absolutely no business existing, in a room that was supposed to hold nothing but memories and silence. Ren was kneeling beside it, one hand resting on the edge, rocking it slightly, murmuring something too soft for him to catch all of it. Her back was to the door. She hadn't heard him, and inside the cradle, half sitting up, working at staying quiet the way small children do when someone begs them to, a child, maybe 2 years old, dark hair, small fists gripping the edge of the blanket, and when that small face turned toward the candlelight for just a moment, Roran saw the eyes, storm gray, the exact shade the court painters could never quite get right, no matter how many times they mixed their pigments trying. His mother's eyes, his sister's eyes, his own eyes, staring back at him out of a face far too young to have earned them honestly. He did not move. He did not breathe, for a moment, though later he would tell no one that, because kings are not supposed to admit to moments where their whole chest goes still. The war that had lived in his shoulders for 4 months, the tension of command, of decisions that got men killed, either way you chose, all of it went quiet at once, replaced by something else entirely, something that felt less like fear and more like the floor tilting slightly under his boots. He thought of his sister. He thought of the healers who had come out of that room a decade ago with gray faces and careful words, telling him there had been complications, that neither mother nor child had survived the night, that he should prepare himself. He remembered the funeral. He remembered standing over 2 small stones in the family crypt, one of them so small it barely counted as a stone at all. He remembered believing every word of it. The floor did not just tilt, it opened. He must have made some sound, some small shift of weight against the old floorboards, because Ren went rigid all at once. Her hand stopped moving on the edge of the cradle. Her spine straightened like a bowstring pulled tight. She turned. There is a particular look people give a king when they are caught doing something they should not have done, a scramble of the face, an attempt to arrange itself into something respectful and apologetic all at once. Roran had seen that look 1,000 times, from soldiers caught sleeping on watch, from nobles caught scheming, from servants caught with their hands somewhere they shouldn't be. Ren did not give him that look. She looked at him the way a mother looks at a wolf that has wandered too close to her den. No scrambling, no performance of apology, just her whole body sliding, without her seeming to even decide to do it, into the space between him and the cradle. "Your Majesty," she said. Her voice had gone flat and careful, stripped of the warmth it had carried a moment before. He did not answer right away. He was still looking past her, at the small face now watching him over the edge of the cradle, with the frank, unblinking curiosity that only very young children can manage in the presence of danger they don't yet know how to recognize. "Whose?" Roran said. It wasn't a question, not really. There was no lift to it, no bend at the end the way a question needs. It was a demand with all the air already let out of it, the way a man says a word when he already suspects the answer and is only asking to hear it confirmed out loud, so it becomes real instead of just possible. Ren didn't answer immediately either. Her hands were shaking. He could see that even in the poor light, the small tremor in her fingers where they gripped the edge of her apron, the kind of shake that comes from a body that knows it might be in real danger and hasn't decided yet whether to run or stand its ground. But her chin didn't drop. Her eyes didn't slide away to the floor the way they always had whenever he'd passed her in the halls these past 2 years. That, more than the child, more than the secret room, more than any of it, that was the thing that actually stopped him cold. 2 years of a woman who could not meet his gaze for more than half a second at a time, and now, caught in the worst possible position a servant could be caught in, she would not look away from him at all. "Answer me," he said, quieter this time, though quiet from him had never meant safe. "He's not a danger to you," Wren said. Her voice cracked slightly on danger, the only sign that the calm was costing her something. "Whatever you're thinking right now, whatever this looks like, he has never been a danger to anyone. He's a child. I can see that he's a child," Roran said. I asked whose. The silence that followed lasted long enough that he heard, somewhere far off in the castle, a door close and footsteps pass. Ordinary castle sounds, ordinary castle night, going on as if the whole world hadn't just shifted underneath him. "Your sisters," Wren finally said. The words landed the way a blade lands, not with drama, not with a flourish, but with a simple, flat weight that changes everything the moment it settles. Roran did not say anything for a long moment. He looked at the child again, the eyes, the dark hair, the same shade his sister's had been before the fever took the color out of everything about her toward the end. The small, stubborn set of the jaw, so like their mother's it was almost funny, if anything about that moment could have been funny. "She died," he said. It came out rougher than he meant it to. "They both died. I stood over the stones myself." "You stood over stones," Wren said, "with nothing under them but grief and good intentions." He looked at her sharply. She did not flinch from the look, though something in her seemed to brace, the way a person braces when they've decided to say a hard thing and are waiting to see what it costs them. "Explain," he said. "Now, all of it." And so, standing in a sealed room that had held nothing but dust and memory for 10 years, with a child watching them both from the safety of a stolen cradle, Wren told him. She told him that his sister had known, in the last months of her pregnancy, that something was different about the child she was carrying. The healers who examined her in private, not the court physicians, but women from the old villages who understood things the court physicians dismissed as superstition, had told her, quietly, that the child would carry the Omega mark, not the Alpha bloodline the court expected from a child of royal blood mixed with a lord's line. Omega, a mark that, among the old families and the older laws still whispered about in corners of the castle, nobody official liked to acknowledge, meant something dangerous. Not dangerous because of anything the child would do, dangerous because of what certain people believed an Omega-marked child born into a ruling bloodline meant for the order of things. A weakness, some called it. An impurity, others said, using worse words when they thought no one of consequence was listening. There had been, in generations past, families that quietly ended such children before they ever drew breath, calling it mercy, calling it necessary, calling it anything but what it was. His sister had refused to let that happen to her son. She had confided in only one person, not a lady of the court, not a healer with a title, but a quiet young maid who had tended her rooms since she was a girl and who had never once repeated a secret in her life. Wren. The night the birth came, Wren said it had gone wrong in exactly the way they'd planned it to look like it went wrong. A difficult labor, a healer sent for too late on purpose, a story ready before the child had even taken his first breath, a story of complications, of a birth that could not be saved, delivered to the court by people who believed they were doing right by protecting a dying woman's last wish. The child had been passed out of that room within the hour, wrapped and silent and very much alive, into the arms of the one person his sister trusted enough to disappear with him into the depths of a castle everyone assumed held nothing but an empty nursery and old grief. His sister had died that same night. That much, at least, had been true. The fever that took her had been real, The stillbirth story built around a child who was very much breathing had been the only lie in the whole terrible night. A lie built out of love, meant to buy a baby a chance at a life that the truth would have ended before it began. 2 years, Roran said, when she'd finished. His voice didn't sound like his own. 2 years, in this castle, under my own roof. 2 years, Ren said. I'd do it again. Every single day of it, I'd do it again. He looked at her for a long moment. The tremor in her hands hadn't stopped, but her voice had not shaken once through the whole telling of it, and he found himself, in the strangest possible corner of his mind, admiring that. A woman with nothing, no title, no name that mattered to anyone in this castle, no protection beyond the goodwill of a king she had just admitted to deceiving for 2 straight years, standing in front of him and refusing to apologize for keeping a child alive. "You lied to me," he said, "to the whole court, to the healers, to the guards who searched this castle after word got out that—" "I lied to everyone," she said, cutting him off, "which nobody did to him, not even his own generals. I would lie to all of them again tomorrow if it kept him breathing. I am not sorry for that, Your Majesty, and I won't pretend to be sorry just because it would be easier for you to hear." Something in Roran's chest did something complicated at that. 2 years of a war that had ground him down to something hard and practical. 2 years of watching men die for causes that got muddier the longer the fighting went on. And here was a woman with nothing to gain and everything to lose, standing her ground over a child that wasn't even biologically hers, refusing to soften a single word of her defiance to protect herself. He thought about calling the guards. It was the correct thing to do, by every law written in the thick books that governed how a kingdom like his was supposed to run. A hidden heir, a deception spanning years, a maid who had broken more rules than most soldiers broke in a lifetime of service. He thought about it, and then he looked at the child again, who had by now lost interest in the tense adults and gone back to gnawing thoughtfully on the corner of his blanket, entirely unaware that his whole existence was currently balanced on a single decision his uncle had not yet made. "Say something else," Roran said quietly. "Tell me why I shouldn't call the guard captain right now." "Because he's your blood," Ren said. "Because your sister died trying to give him a chance nobody else in this castle would have given him. Because the law that would take him from me, that would probably do worse than take him, is not a just law, whatever's written in the old books. And because," she added, and here, finally, her voice did waver, just slightly, "because if you take him from me now, after everything, I don't think I could bear it, and I don't think you could either, if you let yourself actually look at him instead of at what the law says he is." Roran did look at him. He looked at the boy for what felt like a very long time, long enough that the child noticed the attention and offered him, around a mouthful of blanket, a gummy, unguarded smile that had absolutely no business landing the way it did on a man who had, 3 days ago, watched 2 of his own soldiers die on a muddy riverbank without letting himself feel much of anything about it at all. "What's his name?" Roran said finally. Ren blinked, like she hadn't expected that question at all, hadn't expected any question that wasn't some version of an accusation. "Tavin," she said. "Your sister chose it. Before she stopped herself. Before." "Tavin," Roran repeated, testing the shape of it. The boy, hearing his own name, or perhaps just hearing a new voice say something with weight to it, looked up at him with those storm-gray eyes and reached, with the total unthinking confidence only very small children have, one small hand toward the king's face. Roran did not step back. He crouched, slowly, the way a man crouches when he's aware every joint in his body is protesting 3 days in a saddle, and let the boy's hand find his jaw. Small fingers, cold from the drafty room, pressed against 3 days of stubble like it was the most fascinating texture in the world. Something in Roran's chest, which had been braced and hard and ready for war for 4 straight months, simply gave way. He did not cry. Kings, in his experience, mostly didn't, not where anyone could see, and even alone it wasn't something that came easily to him anymore. But something loosened in his shoulders that had not loosened once during the entire border campaign, and for one unguarded moment crouched on the floor of a room that had been sealed for a decade, he was not a king at all. He was a man meeting his nephew for the first time, 10 years too late, because a lie had bought the boy the only chance he'd ever had. "He's real," Roran said, mostly to himself. "He's real," Roran said. The moment did not get to last as long as either of them might have wanted. Down the corridor, faint but growing louder, came the unmistakable sound of boots. Several pairs, moving with purpose. Guards. Roran's own guards, most likely drawn by the light under a door that was supposed to be permanently dark, or perhaps simply doing their rounds and noticing something out of place. Either way, they were close, and closing. Ren's whole body went rigid again, the way it had when she first turned and saw him standing there. Except this time there was no room to hide the cradle, no time to blow out the candle and pretend the room was as empty as it was supposed to be. She looked at the door, then at the boy, then at Roran, and he watched her make a decision, watched her physically brace herself, plant her feet, and prepare to step in front of that cradle again, and take whatever came next, guards or no guards, king's orders or no king's orders. "Let me handle this," Roran said. "Your Majesty, let me handle it," he said again. And there was something in his voice this time that she had clearly heard before, in council rooms and battlefields, the voice of a man who was done asking and had started deciding. He stood, straightened his coat as best he could given 3 days of hard riding, and turned toward the door just as it swung open and 4 of his own guards spilled into the room, hands already on their sword hilts, faces tight with the particular alarm of men who found their king somewhere he wasn't supposed to be, in a room that wasn't supposed to be occupied, at an hour when nothing good is usually happening. They took in the scene in pieces. The king, upright, unharmed. The maid, tense, positioned protectively near an old cradle. The candle, the dust disturbed in careful patterns that suggested regular use, not decade-old neglect. And, finally, the child, awake, curious, and utterly unbothered by the 4 armed men, now staring at him like he'd grown a second head. "Your Majesty," the lead guard said carefully, "we saw the light. We didn't know you'd returned." "I returned an hour ago," Roran said, quietly, "for reasons that turned out to be very good ones." The guard's eyes flicked to the cradle, to the child, and back to his king, plainly working through several possible explanations and settling, with visible difficulty, on none of them. "The boy is my nephew," Roran said, before anyone could ask the question directly. "My sister's son. He did not die 10 years ago, whatever the official record says. He has been kept safe in this castle since that night, under my own roof, by someone I trust." He paused and looked deliberately at Ren. "That someone will be standing at my right hand from this morning forward, in whatever capacity she chooses, and anyone in this castle who has a problem with either of those facts is welcome to bring it to me directly, rather than to the rumor mill." The silence that followed was the loud kind, the kind where 4 grown men, all of them trained to react instantly to threats on a battlefield, had absolutely no idea what to do with the information they'd just been handed. "Your Majesty," the lead guard said finally, very carefully, "the boy's mark is not your concern," Roran said, "nor anyone else's. He is my blood. That is the only fact that matters here, and it is the only fact I expect repeated outside this room." Nobody argued with him. Nobody, in Roran's experience, ever really did, not to his face, not when his voice had gone flat and final like that. The guards exchanged a look among themselves, the kind of look soldiers give each other when they've just watched something happen that they know will be the subject of every conversation in the barracks for the next month. And then, one by one, they bowed and withdrew, leaving the door open behind them as if the room no longer needed to be a secret at all. Ren let out a breath she'd clearly been holding since the boots first sounded down the corridor. "That's it?" she said. "That's really it?" "For now," Roran said. "There will be council members who have opinions. There will be old families who remember the old laws and don't much like the idea of an Omega-marked child standing anywhere near the succession, even at a distance. There will be weeks, probably months, of people trying to talk me out of this decision, in language that will sound very reasonable and very concerned, and will, underneath all of it, be exactly the same fear that made my sister hide him in the first place. And they can talk, Roran said. I've spent 4 months listening to men explain very reasonable reasons why other men should die for causes that stopped making sense to me, somewhere around the 2nd month. I think I can survive a council full of nervous old lords. Something that might have been the beginning of a real smile touched the corner of Ren's mouth, the first one he'd ever actually seen from her, in 2 years of her scrubbing his floors with her eyes fixed carefully on the middle distance. You should sleep, she said, and there was something almost teasing in it, something that hadn't been there a moment ago, now that the immediate danger had passed. You look like a man who rode 3 days straight because his stomach told him to. My stomach, Roran said, has never once been wrong. Lucky stomach. He looked down at the child again, who had, through the entire confrontation with 4 armed guards, remained almost entirely focused on the fascinating texture of his own blanket, occasionally glancing up at the tall stranger with the tired eyes as if trying to decide whether this new person was going to be a permanent feature of his world or just an interesting visitor who would eventually go away like most adults did. Roran crouched again, slower this time, joints protesting properly now that the adrenaline of the last few minutes had started to fade. Tavin, he said again, and the boy's head came up at the sound of his name, that same unguarded curiosity in his storm-gray eyes. I'm sorry it took me 10 years to meet you. The boy, of course, understood none of it. He simply reached out again, grabbed a fistful of the king's collar with the total confidence of someone who had never once had reason to be afraid of the man kneeling in front of him, and tugged, the way small children tug on things that interest them, without any sense of the weight behind who they were tugging on. Roran let him. He would spend the next several weeks, as he'd predicted, fielding exactly the kind of nervous, carefully worded objections from certain corners of his court that he'd expected. Old families invoking older laws, advisors suggesting quiet arrangements that would keep the boy comfortable but far from the castle, well-meaning men explaining, in tones of great concern, why this was a delicate matter requiring delicate handling. He would listen to all of it, the way he'd learned to listen to every argument before deciding what to do with it, and then he would do exactly what he'd already decided to do the moment a small hand had gripped his stubbled jaw in a sealed nursery at dawn. He would spend the years after that watching a boy who should have been buried in an unmarked grave grow up instead in the light, under a name that was his by blood and a protection that was his by decision, with a woman who had lied to an entire kingdom to keep him alive standing close enough to catch him whenever he stumbled. But that morning, in the sealed room that wasn't sealed anymore, none of that had happened yet. There was only a tired king kneeling on an old floor, a maid finally letting herself breathe, and a boy who had no idea yet how close he'd come to never being found at all, pulling contentedly on his uncle's collar, entirely unbothered, exactly the way a child who has always been safe is supposed to be. Outside, the sun had started to come up properly, spilling thin morning light through the high windows of the old nursery, the kind of light that hadn't touched that room in 10 years. Dust motes turned slowly in it, disturbed for the first time in a decade by 4 extra sets of boots and 1 very long night. Ren watched the king and the boy for a moment, then quietly moved to blow out the candle that had burned all night, keeping them both company in the dark. She didn't need it anymore. The room had light of its own now, real light, the kind that didn't have to be hidden. She left it burning anyway, just a little longer, the way you do with something that's kept you safe. It would go out on its own eventually. There was no need to rush it.